I didn't record it.
You didn't record it, okay. All right.
I'm not used to recording Tuesday night unless I'm standing there for JLI. I apologize.
No, that's okay. Was it a good crowd?
Yeah. Quick question. Tomorrow, 7:30. Will you join us?
Yeah.
What about you?
Maybe.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Okay, but tomorrow morning we don't put on tefillin, only in the afternoon. So
7:30.
7:30, yeah. We'll do Milchamaya with the video in the middle. We'll see. If we have a minion, we'll do the reading of the Torah. If not,
I'll prepare.
Please.
Okay.
please. Okay. We'll learn a little Tanya today. I think we can for sure finish the chapter, maybe even get a head start on the next chapter. So we're holding the 26th of Iyar, middle of page 800. Before we do, just a few words of introduction. So we've been discussing at great length on the one hand, the fact that God is present everywhere, no difference, higher worlds, lower worlds, just like the soul, the essence of the soul is present everywhere in the body. And yet, the soul, the way it expresses itself in the body is not the essence. It's one of 248 types of expressions that emanate from the soul, but they're not the soul itself. So in the analog, we've been learning about how relative to Hashem, everything is equal, everything is equally unimportant, everything is equally unvaluable, to a certain degree. But then the sort of automatic response to this is anarchy. If nothing is greater than the next, and nothing's more important inherently than something else, because God is present everywhere, God is present in everything equally. So what makes a human being more valuable than a plant, or than an animal, or than a stone? If God's present everywhere in every creation, what makes Shabbos more important than Sunday? Or what makes Tisha B'Av different than today, than the 8th day of Av? Yeah? And the fact of the matter is, we know there is hierarchy in the world. The world was created and does operate in a hierarchical way. Because God allows us to, for example, God allowed Adam to eat vegetation, and then God permitted to Noah to eat animals, and never permitted to humans to eat other humans, but he permitted them to eat animals. In other words, there is a hierarchy. So where did these differences start from? Where did they come from? By the way, just to point out that where we see this sabbatical, Shemitah, yeah? So once every 7 years, we consider your field as ownerless, and therefore you're not allowed to take anything home with you. Everyone's allowed to eat it. Nothing's yours. What's the how much? What has to be in the field in order for it to be considered that you can't take? Like I can't take 2 days. How many fruits and vegetables can I take just for one meal, just for today, just for this week? How much can I take? So it says as long as there's enough for the animals in the field to eat. In other words, humans and animals are equal in Shemitah. There is no ownership of the field. If there's nothing for the animals to eat in the field, you can't have anything in your house to eat. That sort of represents the lack of hierarchy, the lack of distinction. So if that's the case during Shemitah, that there really is no owner because God owns everything, and there really is no difference because God created everything, so why the other 6 years, is there a difference? Shouldn't all 7 years be the same way? What makes the 7th year different? Yeah. So obviously, in Chassidus, it's explained that, and this is sort of going to be the explanation here, that there are two realities. There's there's God's reality, that there are no differences, that everything is just from God's breath, from God's words, and therefore everything carries the same weight. But that's a very high level. That's not a reality that we get to view or that we get to see. The part that we get to see is the way God invested himself in the world in a much more limited way that we can appreciate. Once you get that far, now there's already differences. Now there's a hierarchy. Once every 7 years, God shines his infinite light, and when that light shines, suddenly all the barriers fall apart. Suddenly there are no differences anymore between man and an animal. Obviously, there are still differences, but at least in one regard, we get the sense that we're all just creations of Hashem, and therefore any value we do have is because Hashem wants us to have that value. So when it came to the body and the soul, we also had this problem, right? Where the essence of the soul is found everywhere, and yet we can't say that the soul is made up of 248 pieces. So where does that come from? So we explained in the soul that the soul has the potential for 248 different types of energies that will come from the soul, but when they're in the soul, they're not seen as distinct entities. Yeah, once they emanate from the soul, then their potential is realized, so to speak. So we have to, again, just for the sake of our conversation, distinguish between God himself and the light that comes forth from God. Okay? That's how we're going to define it. Again, remember, we're speaking human terms. God himself, you can't say there's something besides God himself, because then God isn't truly infinite. There's something else besides he himself. But that's the term we're going to use just because we have no other way of really describing it. But we all understand when I say God himself, I don't mean that God is different or separate from. It's just in our perception, the way we understand it, the way we can imagine it and identify it. So God himself, so to speak, is surrounding all the worlds, Sovev Kol Almin. And then God allows a ray of light to come and fill the worlds. And that ray of light now the Sovev Kol Almin, the level that the God himself that surrounds all the worlds, is concealed. Concealed in what way? Concealed from us, that we can't see it. Right? Before there was an us, God was everywhere. God was everything. So what does it mean God concealed himself? He didn't literally conceal himself. Who does he have to conceal himself from? We're just in his imagination, so to speak. But because we can't see him, we're calling it concealed because we can't see it. In order for us to even recognize that there is a God, that God exists, God had to allow something to penetrate that barrier between infinite and finite, to allow something to come through to give us a hint that there's something else out there that we can't even imagine, but it's there. We should at least know it's there. We should at least know of its existence. Okay, before I tell you the mystical terms for this, and again, like I said a few weeks ago, this is sort of the one place in Tanya where we're going to get quite mystical terms. Just by way of analogy, you know, I mentioned a few weeks ago an analogy from a teacher and a student, but I want to change it up just a drop. A teacher and going into different class, right? We spoke about a teacher being in a classroom. You're an expert in a certain field. You're a pharmacist. And you're coming to give a class to grown adults about pharmaceuticals. You're not intending for them, their intention isn't to become pharmacists. Their intention is just to learn about how pharmaceuticals, how they work, and what a pharmacist does. So You go around the room and you try to find out sort of either what people know already, sort of gauge their knowledge. You also may want to find out what they do or what their profession is, because you may want to bring analogies from the world that they're familiar with. So if you're teaching a certain, like if you go into a business and you're teaching a certain clientele, sort of, that these people are doctors, so it's easy to explain it to them. These people are teachers, so you bring them metaphors from the world of teaching, or you understand sort of the world they're coming from and what type of view they have on things. And regardless of what age or type of class you're teaching, you're going to tailor what you know to fit their worldview, their preconceived notions that they should be able to align with and understand what you're saying, right? When you go down in age, obviously you have to tailor that even further, because the younger you go, they may have zero knowledge about things that you're talking about, and you have to boil down to the basics. Right? They may not even know what a pill is. So before you tell them what a pill is, you have to describe what a pill is and how it's made. So there's a lot more that goes into explaining to a younger age group. Now imagine you went around for a month and every day you taught a different group, and every day your lecture was pretty much different. Well, it was the same points, but it was a different display, because you were tailoring it to each group, each demographic. And then on the 30th day, all of these groups are going to come together and they're going to show their thanks for your lecturing, for your teaching. And they come in, they're surprising you. They come into your house or whatever, to your room where you're staying, to show you gratitude. And you're busy looking in studying something about pharmaceuticals. And you're talking to yourself. You're very much engaged. You don't realize what's going on around you. And you're trying to figure out something that you're being stumped with and trying to figure out, and you've finally figured out the idea and you're excited. All of these 30 different groups or representatives of them that just heard you speak to yourself, all of them just heard a lecture from you within the last month, and it was very different to each group. And they all understood it in their way, the way you presented it. Now, all of these 30 groups heard you speak one language, not 30 different languages, one language. What are the chances that any of them understood anything you said? Remember, you're talking to yourself, so you may not even be saying full sentences, let alone, you may not even be using terms that lay people are familiar with. Probably not, right? So what are the chances? Remember, you're talking to 30 groups that have so little knowledge about pharmaceuticals, you have to tailor what you know to them. So these aren't, very knowledgeable people in your field that are suddenly going to understand the jargon you're using, especially when you're thinking to yourself about problems that you have. You're not explaining to them things that you don't know anything about. You're explaining to them things you know a lot about. So here you're dealing with things that what are the chances anyone will understand anything? Very slim. And yet, this is you. Everything you taught in the last 30 days, sure, it started off as your knowledge, but you had to sort of envision it outside of your head. With these students listening to it, how are they going to understand it? And therefore, you had to add color, and you had to add taste, and you had to add stories and metaphors and examples in order to make it digestible for them. So even though it started off in your head, the way it was presented the last 30 days was, we won't call that your knowledge. Sure, it was based on your knowledge, but you wouldn't say, this is my knowledge. If someone transcribed everything you said in those 30 days and printed a book, this wouldn't be the teachings of Earl Sternfeld, right? This would be the preschool teaching, the kindergarten teachings of Earl Sternfeld, right? But these aren't your teachings. These are based on your teachings, right? These are inspired by your knowledge. Okay, so the way Kabbalah describes creation, and we touched upon this a few weeks at the beginning of this discussion, is that God filled the entire everything. There was nowhere or nothing that was empty of God. There was no place to be empty before God created space. But whatever existed, everything, there was only God. Then remember how God started the process of creation?
And so,
Remember how we described that?
retraction.
Oh, it says he made an empty space. It was an empty space, sort of. He removed his light, his self, from an empty, from a certain space. Now that became empty of godliness. That became space. Now there's a creation, there's a new entity that didn't exist before. And this is space, so to speak. Okay? Remember, it's still spiritual. This Kabbalah calls makom panui, empty space. So now, how is God? Now God has a form. And remember, this is all human talk. This is not literally, okay? But if God was everywhere before, what type of form can you identify in God now? The outline of this empty space, right? So if God is everywhere, you can't see anything because it's all the same thing, yeah? But if God removes himself from one spot, now the outline of that spot looks different than everything else, right? Because now it's so if we're gonna, just for the sake of conversation, say that it was a spherical, empty space that was round in nature that Hashem removed his light from for the world. So now, what Kabbalah calls is the Igul Hagadol, the big circle. Now you have God. If you're able to see outside the circle, everything is God. Inside the circle, it's empty. Remember, this is all from our perception. Right? This isn't for real. It's all from our perception. What happened after there's this big empty space? Now God wants to create a world in this empty space. So God has to get back in here. If God gets back in here, then there's no room for a world anymore. It defeats the whole purpose. Right? The whole purpose was that if God is here and you create a world in God, then there's no world. It's all just part of his imagination. It's like the characters in a novel. They're just creations of the author's imagination. The author thinks to change it. He could change it. He could also backtrack in time and decide, no, this guy was never a doctor. He actually went to law school. Yeah, he's going back in time. He's changing the whole story because it's all in his mind. So if God makes this empty space, but then he goes back inside to create the world, he defeated the whole purpose. Now you have a world within God, and now the world doesn't feel itself. The world is just part of God's imagination. So how do you get a world like this where we can actually feel like we're worth something? Not only that, we can feel that maybe there isn't a God. How do you get that?
Is that where the essence of Ein Sof come in?
Wait, if the essence of Ein Sof was here, we would all experience that, and none of us would feel like we're any separate, or any different than them. Right? Why do children misbehave when the teacher's in the class, but not when the principal walks in? Why are they more scared of the principal than the teacher?
Consequences.
Oh, in other words, they don't see the teacher as holding as much over them as the principal. If God is standing in front of you, you're not being a human being. You're going to operate like an angel. You're not going to do anything that God doesn't want you to do. You're going to be a perfect person. Then God will never have an Earl that can have a Yetzer Hara, that can have an evil inclination, that can have a desire to do some. But God wants to have a struggle, someone who's gonna fight for him. But if God is in your eyes, you'll never have to fight for him. Just like if the principal was in the classroom, the teacher won't have a problem. But the problem is the principal can't be in every classroom at the same time. And if the principal is in the classroom every day, he stops being the principal. Now the kids stop being scared of him. So God couldn't bring himself back into this empty space the way he was before. He had to figure out a technique. The technique he figured out was what we call what Kabbalah terms a kav. You know what a kav is? Kuf vav, not kuf bet. Kuf bet is a measure, is a measurement, a biblical measurement. Actually, if you take the letters kuf and vav, they both sort of resemble. Kav means a line. A line. So remember, you have this big empty space, you have the spherical border around it that's keeping God out, so to speak, and then God punctures a tiny little hole. So now only a very small amount of godliness can come into this world. But he doesn't call it a small amount of light. The Kabbalah calls it a line. Why? Because now you already start getting a hierarchy. It's like a line. A line has a top and a bottom. To get to the bottom, you have to go through all of these levels. There's a hierarchy. And the last part of the line comes through the top part of the line. So the line tells us two things. First of all, it's a very limited amount of divine light because it's only a small line. And that it now already it looks different than before. Before, there were no differences. Before, the light of God that surrounds the worlds, God himself, there is no up and down, higher and lower. It's just God. Now when there's a line, now there's already higher and lower, closer and further from God. The closer you are to this line, to this hole, to this empty space, the closer you are to God, the further you are from God, so to speak. Remember, this is not real, but this is in our perception that we're further from God. And that's why angels and Atzilos feel God's presence. We here don't feel God's presence. But ultimately, God's everywhere. If we're talking about Sovev Kol Almin or God Atzmut, God himself, God's everywhere.
The line principle, maybe when we say where is Hashem, we always point heavenly.
So
From coming down, like on a vertical line.
yeah, yes, but remember, it is still a metaphor. It's not literally a line up and down. But yes, yeah. So we call this in Kabbalistic terms, and we've had this term before in Tanya, Seder Hishtalshalut, which means an order of descent or change. It's one comes from the next. Okay, it's no, there's a better word for it.
Session. Huh? Yeah.
1 minute.
Starting going down, going through a descent.
It is descent, but you can also go up. 1 minute.
It's kind of like bigger travels.
Okay, it'll come to me soon. So what does this line look like? This line already, we are already a little more familiar with this line. Generally speaking, this line has 4 general sections, 4 worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya. Atzilus is the line closest to God, where basically only God is felt, is present. Bria is already, there's a creation, there's something else that's being formed, but God's presence is uh, 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 God's presence is the dominant presence in Bria. Yetzira is already, there's already form. There's already, it looks like something else. Now already it's like 50-50. And Asiya is this, that what's more dominant is creation, but God is also present and felt. And then there's our world. Our world is called Asiya Hagashmi, the physical Asiya. This level of Asiya God's presence is not felt at all. We could try to deduce it, but God's presence isn't felt by default in our exist in our world. And once we're talking about, so even though when we talk about God Himself, there is no hierarchy when we're talking about the way God comes into the world to animate us, to create us, to sustain us, and to animate us, to give us life. Here already, there is a hierarchy. There is a higher and lower. Angels are higher than souls, souls than bodies, bodies. You have different parts of the body. You have the brain, and you have the heart, and then you have the liver, and then there's the actionable, the body parts that don't have necessarily like intention and but are just tools of action, etc. And every world, and then you have in every world you have the 10 sefirot, right? Things that start in the mind and then go down to the emotions and then come into action, right?
Mhm.
There's a hierarchy. You see this most people, well, I shouldn't say most people. I should say the way humans are meant to behave, to act is that you don't just do things. First, you have an idea. Then you think about the idea. You develop the idea until it makes sense to you, until you've figured out, how to implement it. Once you realize that it's practical, now you start getting emotionally attached to the idea because it's an idea I came up with. It's an idea that makes sense. It's an idea that I think I know how to implement. So you start getting excited about it, or you start being in awe of it, start getting emotional about it. And then you start thinking, okay, practically, how am I going to do this? And then you may even speak about it, and then you go and do it. If you see someone doing something, writing a book, you see someone writing the book, yeah? Are they writing a book? Or did this writing the book start in their brain 3 months ago? It went through a whole process, a whole hierarchical process. If you sit down and just start writing without using your brain, you know what we call that? Scribble, a child scribbling, yeah? Nothing's going to make sense. If you haven't thought before what you're going to write, then what you're writing won't sell a single copy. Anything worthwhile is like that. Anything we do instinctively, or because that's what we were told, is missing the foundation of what makes a human a human. And therefore, if a day comes and it's difficult to do the thing, you're not going to do it. Yeah, if you never learn why it's important to sleep or to exercise or to eat or to do important things, you just always did it. You never thought about it. You have no clue why that it's healthy for you, etc. One day you're not in the mood, you're not going to do it. You're not in the mood. And then you'll figure out very quickly that you're hungry. So now you have to figure out, why am I hungry? Oh, I didn't eat. Now that it went through that you processed it, now you're going to eat. Now you're not going to push off your meals as much. Yeah.
Mhm.
So once we get into the Seder Hishtalshalut, into this line that has a hierarchical um, uh, structure to it, now already we have sort of a closer relationship between God and the creations in a way that makes it seem like God might be a little different here than in Gan Eden or than in the higher world, right? God's there more than here. God's more revealed there more than here because there's a hierarchy. But again, that's all the way God allows himself to be revealed into the world, not the way God is on his own by himself. We call this light, the light of the Ein Sof. Why do we call it light? Light in human terms is like almost like a physical thing. Why are we using the term light for God? So Kabbalah explains because light, the reason we use the metaphor for light is because light reveals what was hidden. So remember, before God shined this light into this empty space, God was absent, so to speak. God was hidden. Now, even though what we're seeing is only a ray of light, but we're seeing that there is something greater out there. We know there's a higher power, even though we can't see it, we don't know what it is, but we know it's there because because we saw its effect. We saw a light, a ray of light from its essence. Also, light helps reveal what's here. So we look around the world and we may think we see light, but really it's darkness. Because what do we see? We just see creations. We don't see God. We don't see the reality of everything. Just like when you look at a person, if you only see a body and you don't see a soul, then it's almost like you're in the dark. If you don't realize you can have a relationship with a person, you just think it's a physical object. You think another human being is a physical object. Yeah. People will describe sometimes if someone looks at them like an evil, like someone's like an evil look, they'll say they had no life in their eyes, no light in their eyes. Yeah. Why? Because the person looks at them like an object. In other words, there's no light. There's no, you don't see what the thing really is. It's dark. We call the light of Hashem or Ein Sof because, first of all, it's giving us a glimpse into God. It's allowing us, so it's revealing what's hidden above, but it's also revealing what's hidden here, that we get to see the reality of things here. You like being on the video? I could see you, you know. Okay, you want to sit down? You can sit down nicely. If you want to sit down nicely and quietly? Okay, so sit down nicely and quietly. Okay, let's see inside you words on top. You could use this one. They were sit here. We're on middle of page 800. The difference between the higher and lower worlds is with regard to the flow of vitality, which the blessed Ein Sof causes to flow and illuminate in a manner of revelation out of concealment. What was previously concealed is now revealed, which is one of the reasons why the influence and flow of this vitality is figuratively called light. Again, because it's illuminating what was hidden. Thereby, when God allows this light to come in to the world, to the empty space, so to speak, that animates the worlds and the creatures therein. For the higher worlds receive this vitality and light in a somewhat more revealed form than the lower. And all creatures therein in the higher worlds receive the revealed aspect of vitality, albeit each according to its capacity and nature. So again, there's a hierarchy, each one according to his level, to his ability, which is the nature and form of the particular flow with which the blessed Ein Sof imbues and illuminates it. Just like the soul, when it comes into your eyes, it sees, it doesn't hear. And when it goes into your ears, it hears, it doesn't see. The same thing when the Ein Sof and the light of God comes into each particular world, each particular level, each particular creation, in its way, that creation functions in its way that it's meant to function, in the way that God imbues himself with it. Now, in the higher worlds, that revelation is felt, is present in a way that's felt. But the lower worlds and creatures, even the spiritual ones, do not receive the divine life force in quite such a revealed form as it is received in the higher worlds, but only by means of many garments, wherein the blessed Ein Sof invests the vitality and light which he causes to flow and shine on them in order to animate. In other words, even though it's the same God that's going into all worlds and all levels, but because it's only a light, it's only what he allows to be revealed. So therefore, here it's already coming to each level based on its level, based on its capacity. And therefore, if you were to travel through the heavens, so to speak, and you were to end up at in this angel's chamber and that angel's chamber, you're going to see different realities because they come from different levels within this chain reaction of revelation that starts at its most peak, at its the highest level of revelation, gets darker and darker as more and more levels of concealment are posted on it. So when you see a person sitting and writing his book, yeah, how much of this person's mind is present at that moment? Yeah. Let me do it better. When you see the typist writing the book, how much of the author's intelligence and soul is present right now?
No.
Nothing. Well, the expression of it is in the words that he's typing, right? No one's going to argue and say that the same level of self is present when you're coming up with the idea, when you're developing the idea, then when you're trying to formulate it in your mind, how it's going to be placed onto paper, and then actually writing it down. When you write it down, anyone can write it. You can have someone else come that knows nothing about anything and just hears the words you say and types it mindlessly. So you're not going to argue and say, just because these words contain your intelligence, that these words have the same level of revelation of your soul the way it did in your brain when you came up with the idea. Your soul is much more revealed at that stage than it is in the ink that's on the paper now. Now you hope that you were able to convey some, because in those letters, in those words are contained the genius of your mind, right? But it's not revealed. A kindergarten kid can read the words of the book, not understand a word that's going on, and he can read all the words. So the intellect that's in the words is still there. Just because the kindergarten kid's reading it and doesn't understand what he's reading doesn't mean the intelligence isn't there. It's just concealed. The smarter you are, the more you know about this, the more you read it. Now you see the genius of the author. The more the author becomes revealed in the physical letters, because the physical letters ultimately started all the way up there. That's sort of where we're going to get to now, because ultimately, when we're in this world, we're so far from God that to us it seems that we're separate from God. That and again, maybe even to the extent that God doesn't exist, we could claim that. We could say that. There are people that say that. And it could sound logical. So how can we say that God is present here the same way he's present up there? He's that for sure not, right? But remember, that's only because of the way he allows it to be revealed. That doesn't change the fact that in the ink on the paper that this author wrote is really present, the essence of his intelligence. It's there, you just can't see it. Once you study and figure out what he's writing, you're revealing the author in the paper. When you buy Heidegger.
Heidegger.
Heidegger. You buy a Heidegger book on the shelf in Barnes and Noble, yeah? Do you think the people in the store understand the word that's on the book? Let's say not because they're stupid, but because they never opened it. Okay, let's just assume that for argument's sake. You buy it because you heard that you want to read it. You take it off the shelf. It's a book. It's a $15, $20 book. There's nothing fancy about it. It doesn't scream anything more than a $15 block of pages with ink on it. You bring it home and you read it once, and you didn't understand a word you just read.
It's absolutely true.
It's still a book that's on the shelf that has no vitality to it. There's no life to it. But then you read it a second time, and you read it a third time. Then you start noticing things, and you start underlining things. Then you start highlighting things. Then you start writing things, and you read it 50 times. And now you look at the book when it's on the shelf, you don't see a book anymore. You see a living thing. You see an idea. You see things. How do you see things in a book? Because the book ultimately started and came from a higher place. But the way it came was in a concealed way. The same thing is with each and every one of us, with each particle in the world, everything in the world. When we encounter a leather strap, a piece of parchment, it looks like a piece of animal. What kind of godliness can be present in a piece of animal skin? But then when you take it and you cut it to size and you write a mezuzah on it and you hang it up on the door, now already you walk by it and you want to kiss it. Now there's already some godliness revealed. It was there the whole time. God created this parchment to begin with. God created this animal to begin with. It was present the whole time. It's our job to reveal it, to bring that out. And then we reveal how its essence is really one and the same as Atzilus, as the highest worlds. It's just there by default, everything's revealed. Here, by default, it's concealed. What happens when you have an neshama like of Moshe, of Moses, yeah? Where it says the neshama of Moshe was the neshama of Atzilus. When Moshe lived in this world, all he saw was godliness. When he looked around, he didn't see physical distractions. When he looked at the stone, he didn't look at a stone, how in the world am I going to get water from here? He looked at the stone and he saw a source of water because that's what God told him.
Mhm.
To him, it wasn't a big deal.
But when he asked to see God's face,
Yeah. No.
I mean, it's.
Very good. You're saying something very good.
It's like a contradiction.
No. Oh, so very good. Let's not get delusional and think that just because we could recognize God or reveal godliness, that that's God himself. This is, again, still the way God allows himself to be seen by us. This is like God's backside. We can identify that he's there, but we don't see him. We don't know who he is or what he is. So when you see something happening in this world, that's tragedy. If you see God, so you know that God's there, but do you understand why it's not really a tragedy? No, you just believe that God's there and you see God, so you know he's there, so you're comfortable. Well, when you're a child, yeah, and you're in the doctor's office and the doctor's giving you a pinch, a needle, yeah? If your parent is there, even though you're screaming, at the end of the day, you're comforted because your parent's there. Even though you don't understand why they're holding you down when this doctor is trying to hurt you, you think they're evil, right? They're holding you down. What do you do the minute the doctor's finished? You go run and hug the doctor, you go run and hug your parents. Your parents held you down when he poked you. Why are they any better than the doctor? But you know that they love you, and therefore you know that what they're doing is for your good. Do you know why it's good? No. That's what it means to see the back and not the face. You know that God's there, but you don't know why it's good. Moshe wanted to see God's face. Moshe wanted to see Moshe. 1 minute. Moshe wanted to see the reality from God's perspective. And God said a human being can't live and see that side of it. Because if you live and you see that part of it, now there's even Moshe was challenged and argued with God, where are you? Why are you doing this to these people? He was talking to God, but he was asking God, why are you doing this? I don't understand it. I trust and believe that it's from you and it's good, but I don't get it. It makes no sense. I want to cry. If Moshe would see God's face, he wouldn't ask God to protect the Jews. He wouldn't stick up for the Jews because he would see exactly what God sees. He wouldn't see anything wrong. He would see beauty. He wouldn't ask for Miriam to be healed. He wouldn't see a problem. You can't have a human being that's like that, because a human being that's like that doesn't care about other people because he sees why this person is struggling. What do you mean? This is the way God set it up, and I know the reason. I know what God thinks you're going to be able to accomplish with this. Why would I want to change it? You can't be a human. You can be an angel. You can't be a human being and see God's face. But Moshe was able to see God's back. What does it mean, God's back? He was able to see his shape. That he was able to see his presence more than we can. But what he looks like and what it means. No, you can't be a human being and see that.
Isn't that where you look at it and say it's the physical that we put so much importance into, but that really isn't.
So here's the key. The key that Tanya starts with, and really the whole Tanya is about, is that no, it is the physical. That's why God gave us the physical. God wanted us to reveal him in the physical, but not to go away from the physical because of it. If we saw God as being distracted by the physical or restricted by the physical, then we'd have to abstain from the physical in order to allow God to be revealed. Most religions see God that way. Most religions see God as a spiritual entity, and therefore the physical is an obstacle to God. And therefore its clergy or even its devout followers should abstain from from indulging in physicality, at least, each religion to its degree in it. Judaism doesn't see that. Judaism sees the physical as being the place where God is expressed the most. Otherwise, why did God create the physical? Just as a distraction? No. When you try to test your kids by creating obstacles, you create an obstacle course, yeah? If it's for your kids, you're not just going to try to get as many obstacles as possible. You're going to become creative and think of obstacles that will bring out their potential. You'll think of obstacles that will expose their abilities, their genius to figure out how to get around those obstacles. So is the obstacle hiding God or revealing God? Well, right now it's hiding God. When you figure out how to get through the obstacle, now you see now you see how God brought, so the physical becomes a utility for God in this world. But if you don't see the reality of the physical, then it's just a concealment, then it's just a distraction. So when you uncover the reality of the physical, that it's really God's plan, and God put it there for a reason, now the physical isn't so scary anymore. The cheeseburger isn't daunting because God doesn't want me to eat it. The piece of kosher steak on Shabbos isn't scary. It isn't going to make me less divine. I'm going to, because I'm doing what God wants me to do, I'm going to become more refined with this piece of steak, and I'm going to become less refined with this piece of steak because this is kosher, this isn't. Yeah?
Mhm.
Okay, let's see. 803. These garments, so now remember, we're saying how there's a hierarchy where the lower you go, the more concealed the godly light becomes. These garments, wherein the blessed Ein Sof invests and conceals the light and vitality, are so strong and powerful. These curtains are so room darkening. You have the different grades. You go to the store, you can see the different grades of room darkening. These garments are so powerful that thereby, with this life force and light, he created this world, in other words, our physical world, that is verily corporeal. Yeah, corporeal and physical. So material, it's like only material. And God creates and animates it by the vitality and light which he draws down and shines forth into it. However, this illumination is a light that is clothed, hidden, and concealed within the numerous and powerful garments, which hide and conceal the light and vitality, so that no light or vitality whatsoever is visibly revealed, but only corporeal and physical things that appear lifeless. Right? So in this world, we don't see godliness. We also sometimes don't even see life. You can see dead things, either dead animals or people, or you can even see things like stones and that look dead, even though we know that there is a divine light that's animated that keeps them existing. Yet, all of these things, even dead things, contain light and vitality, which constantly creates them ex nihilo, so that they shall not revert to nothing and naught as they had been prior to their creations. Even though they look dead, we know that they have life. And this light, which is so dark, which we know exists, comes, where does it come from? The blessed Ein Sof. In other words, it comes from the same place that the light of Atzilus comes from. So why here does it look so physical and material and coarse, except that it is clothed in many garments? As it is written in Eitz Chaim, that the light and vitality of the physical orb of earth, which is seen by mortal eyes, is derived from Malchus of Asiya. Right? So Malchus is the lowest of the 10 Sephirot. Each Sephira is composed of all 10. So this is Malchus of Asiya, of the spiritual Asiya, comes into this physical Asiya, and now it's pitch black. There is no godly light that's visibly godly. And in it is contained Malchus of the next highest world, the world of Yetzira, and so on. In other words, within Malchus of Yetzira, in turn, there is contained Malchus of Bria, and so on. So that in all of them, within the level of Malchus of all the worlds, including the level of Malchus of Asiya, are contained the 10 Sephirot of the loftiest world, the world of Atzilus, which are united with their emanator, the blessed Ein Sof. Seder Hishtalshalut, a shalsheles is a chain. Okay, so when we say Seder Hishtalshalut, it's not just a line of descent. It's a chain. Imagine like a chain link, where each link is present within the space of the higher link. It's not where they're connected like this. Yeah, the lower world receives its vitality and its strength from the higher world. Okay, so you can't have the lower chain without it being infused by the higher link. Yeah. So even if you have a chain that has 100 links, ultimately the lowest link has within it from the source of the first link, because the second link has within it the first link, no matter how room darkening, no matter how shaded the second link becomes, it still has the DNA of the first link, right? It still has some of it. And therefore, when it goes down to the third link, again, it's more concealed. Now it's more visible as the second link. You don't really see the first link anymore, but the DNA is there. And the same thing is the 100th link. Even though here you only see the 99th link, you don't even see the 50th link, let alone the first link. But the first link is still present in the 100th link. That's physically. Physically, you see how diluted it is. Spiritually, it still could remain as present, right? Because the link is actually receiving, in a physical chain, the link isn't really getting anything from the first chain. But if it's actually getting something, it's actually present in it. So it's a lot more, but it's still as dark and as removed, as unseeable the way it is. So this world that we live in today, because it's so far removed from Atzilus, God isn't visible at all to the naked eye. But he's just as present. And therefore, if we use our minds a little bit, we can uncover that. And sometimes we could even get a glimpse of it by the giving of the Torah, by this. But the Jews were able to get a glimpse of it. And every once in a while in our own lives, we could get a glimpse of it, perhaps not with our physical eyes, but with our physical eyes and our mind, we can get a glimpse of the reality of the higher power, of the supreme being that animates and creates everything.
Is like is the lowest part of the Severa actually connected to the top part of the next
Yeah.
Sphera? So that's where it overlaps, you're
Mhm.
saying? So like Malchut's from the beginning, say the highest
It
chain.
says Malchus of Atzilus becomes the Keter of Bria,
Ah,
becomes the crown of Bria.
okay, that's how it's,
Yeah.
I got you.
Now,
Not that it's actually touching, but it becomes that link and reinforces.
yeah. Now, the way the top link is present in the bottom link is already colored by the bottom link. So the world in the bottom link doesn't see this part as this part. It sees it the way it's already colored through the lens of this part,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But still, it is present there.
okay. So you mentioned a dilution, so it, even though, like you say, the DNA is there, but each level gets.
Physically, we call it diluted. And therefore, even though the DNA is there, it's not there in the same strength and in the same way in the lowest link as it is in the highest link. But spiritually with God, the same God that's present here is present here. It's just that it's more diluted for us to see. But it's not diluted in the sense that it's not God's presence. It's still God's presence, the same way.
Mm.
Same ability to animate and to give life and
Same, but prevent, because of the klipa, that.
not just klipa. It's called levushim, garments, that concealments. Yes, eventually it turns into klipa as well, but it's not just klipa. Klipa is a shell, so you have klipas noga. In this world, it's klipas noga. It's the sort of the translucent klipa, the klipa that could reveal, if we use it for the right thing, could reveal godliness, but can also conceal. I just want to bring this to a sort of it's a mystical idea. We're gonna go even further next week in chapter 52. But if we just look around, this is the Torah's view on life and the world in general. Let's talk about humans just because that's what we are. But really the same thing is with all levels of creation. No two human beings are created equal because there's a hierarchy. Hierarchy in the sense that God is revealed in different ways in every step of creation, just like your eyes and ears. They're both animated by the soul, but they look very different. So what's more important, your eyes or your ears? They're different. They're both important. So we have men and women. We have Jews and non-Jews. We have adults and children. We have adults that are intellectually superior. We have adults that are physically superior. In other words, superior, I mean that they're stronger and able to do different things. There are no two creations that are alike. And yet, it cannot be said about any creation that he is superior to another creation, because ultimately we're all a result of the divine infinite light. So to a man, a woman's responsibilities may seem trivial. To a woman, a man's responsibilities may seem hollow. But that's because you're a woman and he's a man. To him, this is his God-given potential, and to you, this is your God-given potential. You can live your life 100%. He can live his life 100%. Doesn't make him better than you or worse than you. Makes him different than you. And to a much smaller degree, but to the same degree, no two men are alike. Every man is as different, as distinguishable from the man next to him as he is from the woman. And by the way, every animal has its own purpose, and every blade of grass has its own purpose. And ultimately, we could boil it down. Every particle in creation has a purpose that doesn't make one greater than the other, only if you look through the prism of God's creation. Now there's a hierarchy. But the hierarchy is just to distinguish us that we have different responsibilities, not to tell us that we're essentially better or worse. Essentially, we're all just come from God's imagination, from God's speech. We all come from the same particles, from the same gold. We're not gold, silver, and copper people, right? We all come from the same material. The blade of grass is no less divine. It says when Mashiach comes, the stone that we walk on will scream out and say, why you, if you walk on the stone without thinking Torah, he'll say, wait, why you walk? What makes you better than me? If you're thinking words of Torah, now you're expressing your divine purpose. And Hashem said a man can walk on the stone. But if you're not thinking Torah when you're walking on the stone, what gives you the right to walk on the stone? So when Mashiach comes, God will be so apparent in the world that because God will be revealed, which hasn't happened since the beginning of creation. So the stone will call out. What does it mean the stone will speak? The stone's going to have a mouth? No, but you're going to see it. You're going to walk on the stone. You're going to look at the stone. You're going to see that it's God's creation. It's going to be screaming in your ears, wait, I better do my purpose if I want to walk on this. How can I walk on God's creation? It's like people on Shabbos, they're scared to walk on the ants because maybe they'll kill the ants. You're not allowed to kill animals on Shabbos. Somebody allowed to walk down the street on Shabbos. Don't look at the floor, because if you look at the floor, then you can't walk. If you see the ant, you can't walk on it, because now you're killing it. But if you're just walking, then you're walking. If you're walking to show you're doing a mitzvah, so you're allowed to walk. But you can't just walk around outside because maybe I'll kill some ants. It's biblically forbidden to do that on Shabbos. So if you're a person, if you're doing people things, you're allowed to walk around. If you're doing evil things, childish things like trying to kill ants, you're not allowed to walk around on Shabbos. Okay. Pause here. Next week, God willing, we'll start chapter 52. Yes. It's 11:59. We're 1 minute early. Last couple of weeks, we finished a few minutes early. Some of you finished a minute or two late. That's fine. But today we started on time, I think, pretty much.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, you know how I like writing my period.
Yes.
So, so when someone said, oh, I have a parody for